What is up, YouTube? I'm Casey with bestinvestingapps.com, and today I'm going to be sharing with you some of the awesome educational stock market and investing podcasts that I love and listen to myself, and I'll make sure that I give all of the links to you in the show notes below so that you can go check them out yourself. I first got started listening to podcasts when I was driving back and forth across the country as a ski instructor in Utah and also living in Michigan. That 24-hour car ride made time for lots and lots of podcasts, started building up some of my finance and investing education, and many of these podcasts I still listen to and love, so I'll share those with you today. I'm going to start by introducing you to the podcast Money for the Rest of Us by David Stein, who is a formally trained investment manager. He starts his podcast in a very easy to digest way. From podcast number 1, what is money? What causes inflation and deflation? Should you invest in individual stocks? He really makes a progressive case through about the first 20 or so podcasts. Teaches you about money, teaches you about inflation and macroeconomic trends. If you want to know what the Federal Reserve Bank is or how it works or what it does and how that affects your investments, all of that information is in there in a really easy to understand way. He presents it all with good stories and examples. Super digestible, very tangible, and I think that his approach is very sensible. So head on over to moneyfortherestofus.com/episodes to check out the older episodes or use your favorite podcast player. Check the show notes below. I'll have the link to Money for the Rest of Us. Again, David Stein, great podcast, and he's starting a YouTube channel. I know it's pretty new, but you can also find the link to his YouTube channel down in the show notes. Next up is the Rule Breaker Investing with David Gardner, one of the founders of The Motley Fool. If you haven't heard of The Motley Fool, it was one of the original web-based stock picking newsletters / websites. It's been around forever. It's got a big following. This podcast specifically is all about picking individual stocks. And the guests on the podcast often talk about future-oriented events. The information skips around a little bit. There's not a very clear beginning or end to the flow or the series, which is fine. I find that I have to pick through the podcast a little more to find the gems. So I add this in, and I'll listen to ones when I find something that looks interesting, but I find that I don't listen to it perhaps as much as some of the others. I suppose that I have Dave Ramsey to thank for really getting started. He was the first podcast that I found and started listening to years ago when I was trying to figure out how to get started investing. Dave Ramsey's podcast has a little bit of Christian-based faith in it, so if that bothers you, you may not be able to tolerate it. I am not particularly religious, but I find that it's infrequent enough that it doesn't bother me, and there's some really good advice and information in there. So this is a great show for you if you want real examples. He takes callers live on the air all the time. DaveRamsey.com/show/archives. Check the show notes below. The show talks more about debt and credit cards and mortgages. It's very hands-on, it's very practical. It talks about everyday problems with everyday people, and it's a really good show to get a sense of what other people are struggling with, how other people are handling things. Not everyone agrees with Dave's strategies, but I think they're great for some people. So get out there, give it a listen, see if it makes sense for you, and it could be a great podcast. Last but not least is the Stacking Benjamins show. This show is run by two fun guys, and they often host a roundtable of other guests that you will get to know pretty well. I find that they have a interesting, diverse viewpoint. I think they do a good job of considering financial and investing matters from more than one perspective, and it's a good educational show. Comes out every day, and it usually has current news, and these gentlemen's take on the current news. Joe Salsihai and OG, the other guy, host the podcast. They're fun to listen to. The podcast is well put together. Despite the fact that they constantly make fun of themselves, they do have a lot of good information to share, and I definitely think it's worth your time. So head over to stackingbenjamins.com, and ironically, their episode today is about how to protect yourself from the next market crash, which I've been talking a little bit about on our YouTube channel as well. So I'm going to have to give that podcast a listen. I haven't listened to it yet. Check the show notes below for the link and go check it out. If you are an Android user and you're looking for a podcast player, I've been using Podcast Addict. I'll throw the link in the show notes below. It's worked well for me, at least. I used to use the integrated Apple podcast player when I was using an iPhone, switched over to Android, had to find a new player. Podcast Addict has treated me well, so I'll share it with you. Don't take my word for investing stuff. Go listen to some of these other podcasts. Get your information from more than one source. Educate yourself, and it's a great way to go for a run in the morning and listen to a podcast. I like to go out for a run and I'll listen to a full podcast episode. Helps my brain get moving and my body get moving. It's good for long car rides, airplane rides, so you can be feeding yourself investment knowledge from more than one source right through your earballs all the time. Check the show notes below for a link to my free ebook, Invest 3 Easy Steps to Get Started Investing, and we'll catch you next time.